started in Parliament and then rippled out across the country. And just a quick reaction, which I think is interesting, from the EFF, which has hailed Robert Mugabe as a liberation leader, but recently said that he was overstaying his welcome. The EFF saying on Twitter it welcomes and celebrates President Mugabe's resignation. In essence, President Mugabe has accepted the democratic outcome of the ZANU PF Central Committee meeting, which overwhelmingly voted for his recall. And indeed, the party recalled him, but because they have a different system to us, he was voted directly, not indirectly. Therefore, he was still president of the nation until that letter was written and read out today. Peter, over to you.
Francis, thanks very much indeed. A little bit earlier on, when Griselda was reporting, we were hearing people saying Mugabe akatengesa nyika, saying that he had sold the country, and Tichambisa, we are going to remove him. And this is a song that they've been singing up until this day, so they're going to have to find new songs, I'm afraid, to celebrate the removal of Mugabe. And then earlier on, you just saw images there, and where they were, the parliamentarians, because there's so many of them, the parliamentarians plus members of the Senate, they couldn't all fit in Parliament, so they congregated in a hotel which is very close to ZANU PF headquarters, formerly known as the Sheraton Hotel, one of the flag piece buildings that went up soon after independence. And they got the news, of course, that the president has resigned, and I guess he was under a lot of pressure because he called a cabinet meeting this morning, and it sounds like maybe 1 or 2 people showed up, and possibly that might have been the last message, because how can you run a government when nobody is listening to you? Well, the opposition, the MDC, I'm sure will be celebrating as well this evening, and to talk to us about that, I'm now joined by MDC ambassador, shadow ambassador in South Africa, Mr. Austin Moyo. Thank you very much for joining us. The last time we spoke, the president was still president, and it looked like there was going to be quite a bit of time and processes. Did this resignation take you by surprise?
It took us by surprise, but it's a brilliant surprise. You know, you feel like jumping and rejoicing. Yeah, you know, it was really a surprise.
So it is interesting. For the MDC, what does this mean, though?
I think it means that we are moving to a new era. We have been in the trenches fighting from 1999 when we launched MDC up to the present moment. A lot of elections have been stolen along the way. We know that it's still ZANU PF that is in power. That has not changed. It's just one man that has moved away. But we are sure that going forward, all the reforms that we've been asking for, electoral reforms, media reforms, security sector reforms, and the implementation of the new constitution, we are sure that that will take place, and then when we go to elections next year, it will be a leveled field.
We had a guest just now who said that, look, opposition politics are dead for the next 15 years. Because you had nothing to do with the scenes that we're seeing now, we're seeing people carrying pictures of Chiwenga and hugging the army. How can you be certain there will be elections next year? How can you be certain that this incarnation of ZANU PF is going to allow the kind of democracy that you've been fighting for so many years?
I am aware that this actually reincarnates ZANU PF. But Zimbabwe is a law-abiding country. We've got a constitution that actually guides how elections are held in Zimbabwe. And whoever steps in Mugabe's shoes will have to complete that term of the president that just stepped down in July. And then we have to go to elections. If that's not the case, then SADC and the other parties will have to tell us what the problem is.
Without having to go through the impeachment process, that has essentially put you off the hook in terms of having to join a unity government or a transitional arrangement. Are you going to let ZANU PF run and stay in power until the elections next year?
It was not our intention originally to go into a transitional authority. So the only difference is that we did not become part of the voting process for an impeachment process. But we were not intending to be part of a transitional authority. So our we still stand the same way, that we are waiting for elections, and elections it will be.
But some of your members didn't want to vote for impeachment because they didn't want to be seen to be getting into bed with ZANU PF.
It was negotiated at length, but we had conditions. We were not just going to automatically give it to ZANU PF. They had to assure us in writing that all the outstanding reforms will be implemented, and guarantee us that we will move to an election next year.
So in the end, his resignation was the perfect solution for everybody.
It's not the perfect solution. ZANU PF is still in power. So we still have to fight. The fight doesn't stop.
So what will happen, do you think, in the coming days?
They will convene again in Parliament. ZANU PF will produce their candidate, and then he will be inaugurated, and then we continue to encourage our people to continue to register to vote next year, because the PVR system is in place. They must continue to register. Zimbabwe is geared for an election.
Right now, who's running the country? Because this is a concern for us constitutionally. How do we interpret what's happening now? Who's in charge of the country?
I know a lot of people are saying the army is in charge. To a certain extent, you can say that, because they are the ones who implemented all this that is happening now. I just hope that we are not creating a precedent that in the future, anybody who the army doesn't like, they will be able to take out. I hope we'll be able to correct that.
But who's running the country right now? Is it...
it's on autopilot. It has been on autopilot for quite a while.
Constitutionally, that is not allowed to happen.
Yeah.
So is it not Deputy President Mpoko?
Mpoko, no, he wasn't. He was not available.
So constitutionally, what happens though? Do we know?
Mugabe was still the president up until this afternoon. So in essence, there was no vacuum there. But now that he has given a letter of resignation, still there is no vacuum, because the Constitution has got it allows for a procedure to be followed.
So he's still president until his replacement is put in, sworn in.
He's president, I think, until his replacement is sworn in, although his letter has been received.
What's been the reaction of your president, Morgan Tsvangirai?
I couldn't get hold of him, but I'm sure he was jubilant as well.
And you know, we can't forget the iconic image of him coming out of detention after being tortured and beaten up back in the day. And so this has been a struggle for you as an MDC, as an opposition party, that one stumbling block is out of the way for you. But as you say, still so much to do.
There's still so much to do. That's why I keep saying that now there are other liberation fighters after the ones that liberated Zimbabwe in 1980. We've got those that died in the trenches after independence, after 1980. And those are also liberation fighters, and we're still in the trenches. We're hoping that that will not take place again, like what happened in 2008 as a violent election. We're hoping that during this period up to elections, that violence will cease to exist, and the army will really show that what it was doing here, it is for the people of Zimbabwe and not for a few people.
So we've seen some images of what looked like former Minister Kaskwere and Jonathan Moyo on a plane, and reports are that they're somewhere in Mozambique. So it would seem that a deal has been secured. Zimbabweans won't be happy that they've been let off the hook. Perhaps they would have let Robert Mugabe off the hook, but Kaskwere and Moyo and others?
I think we live in an international community where the law governs the whole globe. If ever they need to appear in court, I'm sure there will be channels to locate them and take them to whichever court will try them, if someone raises that.
And you as the MDC, if you win the election next year, you're in power, will there be a justice project going after those people that caused all this chaos and mayhem for the 37 years?
MDC is a social democratic party, so we listen to our people. if the people will say they want that. Because the only amnesty that we had been negotiating for is for the President Mugabe.
Okay.
So if there is anything like that, I'm sure a Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be set.
All right, let's just hear what some people are saying on the streets, Francis.
And we are expecting new blood in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe will never be a colony again, as he used to say, Mugabe. We are no longer interested in Mugabe. This is history. We are celebrating and we are overjoyed. As Zimbabweans, we say glory be to God. We thank God. This has been too long. We Zimbabweans have been living under Mugabe's regime, where people, there were more than two categories of citizens. We're being treated as second-class citizens. I thank you.
Today is just another day that we never expected as Zimbabweans. We were looking forward to this day, and all I can say is Mugabe is now officially gone. I'm a Zimbabwe citizen, and I believe in a new Zimbabwe coming very, very soon. In fact, the new Zimbabwe that we have been waiting for ages, for 37 years, is right here. We have it now. I say Viva Zimbabwe, Viva Zimbabwe. To all the Zimbabweans out there, I hope you are celebrating this day. This is a new day, an Independence Day to us all. Thank you.
Alright, we continue to bring you live visuals from the streets of Harare. Joy and jubilation, you can see there, young and old. We're hearing from young people on the streets as well. Saw some beer. These celebrations are expected to continue throughout the night. The news started in Parliament. The Speaker read out his official resignation and it spread out across the nation, and we saw this outpouring of Zimbabwean people. Let's get some reaction from the party itself, ZANU PF, that had already decided that President Robert Mugabe would go. He was defying that, but let's see what they're saying. Operation Restore Legacy. Big up to the Zimbabwe Defense and Security Services. Now remember, that's what the army called its intervention. It didn't want to call it a coup, and we heard from Chiwenga, the general, saying that Operation Restore Order was underway. So the party giving the sense that's certainly what it wants to present, is that the party was supporting the Defense Forces operation and not using the word again, coup. Dawn of a new era in Zimbabwe. President Mugabe has resigned. So this was just the first outpouring from ZANU PF itself. All right, let's show you some more sound from the streets.
Thank you to the armed forces of Zimbabwe. Yes. When elections could not get rid of Robert Mugabe, the army did it, and they did it with professionalism. Yes. You are proud of them.
Thanks to ZANU, we are extremely happy about this occasion.
We are happy he's gone. We thank
Dictator
God
is
for
long gone.
everything. Hallelujah.
Mugabe ngayende idoti.
thanking the military, the ZANU PF party, the ruling party itself, thanking the military. This was a coup by all intents and purposes, although many of the officials stepped back from calling it that. Not one shot was ever fired. Nobody was hurt in the protest action that followed. There was no violence, not even much vandalism, except Mugabe's sign. Let's get more reaction for you from the EFF. No military in human history has managed to ensure the facilitation of the removal of a president without any spill of blood, whilst respecting all democratic processes and institutions. And it seems like this has been perhaps one of the most peaceful coups then in history. Perhaps the surrounding nations and everybody who responds to this does have to consider the precedent that this was certainly started by the military. The EFF again saying, above all, it tells a story of true self-determination when a people come together and chart an unprescribed path for themselves, which will go on to be emulated by many generations of other countries to come. So everybody acknowledging the military involved, but saying this was taken then by the people. Julius Malema himself saying done. He was a supporter of President Robert Mugabe, but recently critical of the president for overstaying his welcome, he said. Professor Jonathan Moyo, there'll never be anyone like Robert Mugabe. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have served my country under and with him. I'm proud that I stood with and by this iconic leader during the trying movements of the last days of his presidency. Democracy requires politics to lead the gun. So you'll notice that that is a very different statement from somebody on the other side, from a cabinet member. Jonathan Moyo earlier this week tweeted and then deleted a tweet saying that he and several other Zimbabwean leaders who were about to be arrested were in fact out of the country. He subsequently took that off his Twitter, but tonight not standing down, saying that he stands firm by President Robert Mugabe and suggesting that the gun was leading politics and not the other way around. All right, we're bringing